99% of businesses are small businesses and micro businesses. So do you think you've got a good nose for identifying the next big one?
Now today, we are joined by another amazing guest, Richard Bearman, who's a seasoned leader in the banking sector with over 25 years of experience. Richard has really dedicated his career to supporting entrepreneurs and small businesses, ensuring that they have the financial backing and strategic support needed to grow and thrive.
If you make sure the pyramid is big enough at the base, you've got a much better chance of building those superstar businesses of the future.
Do you think entrepreneurs have the right conducive environment to be able to do that here?
There's always things that can be better. I particularly enjoy the startups. The UK has an innovative entrepreneurial spirit.
I mean, why did you decide to become a banker in the first place?
As co-chief banking officer at the British Business Bank, he plays a crucial role in overseeing the bank's relationship management function, which helps create a seamless growth pathway for businesses by supporting delivery partners across banking products.
It was very, very accidental. Of course, things are complex, but sometimes they're over-complex. Concentrate on your strengths.
Do you think you've got a branding problem?
We are spending a lot more time on starting to get our brand more recognised.
Do you still have imposter syndrome?
Okay, that's interesting. Why is that happening? It's me telling me something.
When are you most out of your comfort zone?
I know that and I have to do it, but I have to force myself to do it.
There have been times in your career where you'd been faced with forks in the road.
Yeah, I had a difficult moment. Legal investigations. I hadn't done anything wrong, but got drawn into something really quite grim, quite horrible, quite difficult. I remember going home to my wife and just saying,
Today's episode is brought to you by Studio Space, a leading on-demand marketing agency platform that enables marketers to browse and brief agencies, receive proposals, and start work all in the one place. It really is like kind of having your own agency network at your fingertips, but without all the hassle, because they take care of everything, from things like contracting to invoicing and procurement to legal. So you get the very best talent working on your brands to really help you grow. Do check out Studio Space today. Now, back to the show.
Richard, so good to have you on the show with us here today. You're in a unique position in that you really do have a pulse on the nation, business, small business today. And the last few years, clearly the UK landscape has been challenging for many. What do you think are some of the reflections, some of the sentiment on the ground here in the UK?
yeah, it has been challenging, and right now there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in the world. But when you talk to small businesses and entrepreneurs, it's actually one of the reasons I love what I do. It's that boundless sort of enthusiasm, and yes, confidence is an issue, and you can see surveys at the moment that say business confidence is under pressure, and there are things to think about if you're running a business, but entrepreneurs tend to find a way. They tend to find the drive. They are resilient generally, and I think it's so difficult to sort of summarize how millions of different people are operating. But I'd say there's a sort of a reserved confidence, waiting to see what happens. I think in some cases, I think there is nervousness about global events, and also where we are in the UK, but by and large, there is confidence, and I think sometimes we can over-talk the problems, and there are sort of some better signs in the system than sometimes gets reported. So I'm always an optimist, but I think the entrepreneurs tend to find a way.
I love that thought, and it is all about entrepreneurships are very much at the forefront of innovation, and if there's any way that the UK is going to make a big comeback, it's through growth. It's through seeing things differently.
Yep.
Do you think entrepreneurs have the right conducive environment to be able to do that here?
I think so. I mean, it's our job it's part of my job and my colleagues' job at the British Business Bank to play a part in creating the right environment. There's always things that can be better, but there's also some great infrastructure that we've got and some great things on the go. And again, sometimes we talk it down, but the UK has an innovative entrepreneurial spirit, and there's there are it's a great privilege of mine to spend time with I particularly enjoy the startups.
Right.
You know, people at that start of the journey, coming up with that creative idea, the point of difference, or just finding the thing they want to do, or their passion project, or whatever it is, and whether they end up as the next unicorn selling for hundreds of millions, or whether they're just finding a way of bringing some extra money into their families' bank accounts. It's a privilege to do, and I do think we have a good environment for that, and we have a lot of startups in this country.
It is, isn't it? I mean, it's obviously the stat being that 99% of businesses are small businesses and micro businesses and the like. So do you think you've got a good nose for identifying the next big one?
If
only you did, maybe.
Yeah, if only I did. I've worked in sort of SME type finance for 25 years now, and I think that's always been the sort of the magic thing. Can you spot the next big thing? Can you spot the sort of the superstar business of the future? I mean, it's difficult. It is difficult, but then I think that's one of the what we have to do is if you make sure the pyramid is big enough at the base,
yes,
you make sure as many businesses support you, create an environment and a culture that encourages people to take that big leap to launch a business. If you can create enough of a broader base, you've got a much better chance of building those superstar businesses of the future.
I hear you. Well, look, let's dive into what is the British Business Bank for those who are unacquainted.
So we are basically the UK's economic development bank. So we are ultimately owned by the government, owned by everyone. We're there to support the UK. We operate. We basically have sort of four key objectives. So 4 things that we focus on, which is to drive sustainable growth, to back innovation, to build a modern green economy, and to support partnerships, to support the growth of businesses across the UK. So we're not there to compete with the market. We're there to find those gaps or market failures or the areas where we can either do something that the financial services market can't do to support small businesses, or to amplify and build on what they're already doing. So it's a really interesting organisation to work for.
It must be coming from an HSBC type of environment. I mean, how did you get involved in this?
It's about 5 years ago. So I think I've really enjoyed my time at HSBC, and I think there was a moment at HSBC where I kind of clocked into. I mean, maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more later, perhaps, but really clocked into sort of what's, as cliched as it is, what's my purpose? What am I doing? Why do we do what we do? And I just clocked into SMEs, and particularly smaller SMEs and startups, as the sort of the energy that they have, and if you can play a small part in helping those businesses to be successful, that gives quite a lot of satisfaction. I just remember having one of those light bulb moments of driving down a high street in West London and seeing an optician that I'd helped provide a little bit of money, and it was sort of 10 years later they were still trading, and I just got this little wow. Okay, I wasn't responsible for them trading, but that small bit of help, that small bit of support. And so towards my latter time at HSBC, kind of really locked into that. And then when I got a phone call about the British Business Bank and people started talking about the purpose of the bank and what we're there to do, it just felt like another big step in the right direction to hopefully I can sort of help the organisation, but more importantly, give me that sort of sense of purpose. And you get up in the morning and you think, okay, there's something here that I can do and hopefully do well, but also make a bit of a difference. As you know, I know it's cliche, but that's quite a powerful thing.
Well, I kind of think that all of us are sort of looking for that sort of similar thing, that concentric circle between perhaps purpose, profit, career. Yeah. And it's refreshing when you find it, isn't it? Yeah.
I remember. So if you go back to the sort of 2008 and the big financial crash. At the time, I've got 2 boys. And they were still just about at an age where their parents were sort of God. Anything you say is true. That sort of age where they believe everything, and you're sort of, that you are their kind of. They don't doubt you. They don't question you. But they were getting close to an age where clearly the questions were going to come. And I just remember at that time. I actually remember being at someone's birthday party and someone pounced on me, and they sort of pounced on me and said, you're the banker. In fact, they swore at me, you're the so-and-so banker. Never met this person before, and they were angry. And, and I was sitting, and I took a lot of, and it was quite shocking how angry that person was. And I dwelt on it a lot and thought, okay, so my boys, I want them to be proud of me. I want to be able to talk about what I do. I want to sort of hopefully in some way, in some small way inspire them and all that sort of stuff you want as a parent. And I kind of thought, okay, but they're going to start absorbing media and is that what they're going to think? And so how do I talk to them about what I do and actually what do I do and does it make a difference? Does everything? Can I talk about it in a way that's positive? I mean, now they're 16 and 18. Clearly, they still think I'm an idiot. But I think that's sort of part of that for me, the journey to the British Business Bank.
I tell you what, I heard this really interesting saying which says you can change the world, you just can't change your kids. And perhaps the perception that they have of you. Don't worry, I'm in a similar boat, but starting at the beginning and at the moment. So lots of challenges to come. SMEs probably profess, I don't know whether it's rightly or wrongly, that typically there's a bit of lack of support that comes from the ether society, the infrastructure created, the financial system. What would you say to that? And perhaps what would you say is the British Business Bank's role that you could perhaps lend an opinion to for someone who's in an SME situation looking for a level of support? How would you go about that?
So I actually don't think there's a lack of support. I think there is a confusing landscape of support, which I think is slightly. I think there's a lot of support out there. There's a lot of different financial services organisations. There's lots of different. There's been a proliferation of different products, services, lots of challenger banks, and so there's lots of support out there from a funding perspective, and also there's lots of organisations that offer support in terms of helping people understand how to run businesses and how to try and signpost organisations to training or material and everything else. But I think but there's a lot of it, and it's not always as easy to access, and it's also a difficulty to know, well, which organisation do I go to?
Exactly.
And so that is part of our role as well. I think both through helping those financial services organisations, be they the bigger all the way through to the challengers or the CDFI market, helping them have the capital available to do things, to fund, but also to try and help organisations to sort of signpost them to the right answers. So we do have something called the Finance Hub, which is there that people can effectively put in. This is what I'm looking for essentially, and then we can try and direct them to the right place. And we have a lot of collateral to try and position ourselves as hopefully a trusted organisation. We're not ultimately we're not a financial service organisation that's bottom line isn't the key for us. I mean, it's important. We have to be commercial, but that's not what drives us. And so I think we have that sort of position of trust and hopefully can be a respected organisation that tries to help organisations navigate to the right finance or the right support.
It sounds a little bit counterintuitive to what banks have traditionally thought of, not just a profit motive.
Well, that's the nature of an economic development bank. So all of our program, everything we do, to my mind, has to have a commerciality. It's public money. We do know you don't want to be throwing this stuff away, and we have to think about, is the return right? Is the right thing to do? Have a credit policy on things, and all that sort of stuff. So we want to make sure that there's a commercial focus, but also everything we do should have a degree of what we call additionality. It needs to make a difference in some way, and it's a bit of a spectrum. At one end, we have very near commercial products that are investments done on almost commercial terms, but there's always a point of difference. There's always something that's going on there that's making a difference in some way.
Give me an example.
So the most extreme commercial end, it might be something where actually the terms of the product are commercial, the way it's structured is commercial, but in sort of the more investment end of what we do, quite often the first mover is really important. Once someone goes and invests in a business, others will follow. And a big part of what we do is not just about using effectively our money. It's actually trying to use our money in a way to draw others in and then sort of catalyze and get the market moving in a certain direction. And what we'll also do is sometimes the terms will be the same, but actually we'll call patient capital, i.e. we will go in and rather than expect to get out quickly, we will stay in much longer. So you might go in early, draw others in, but stay in. And it's that's at one end of the spectrum, all the way down to the other end, something like startup loans, which is putting small amounts of money into early stage startups is the reason it's not done generally by the market is because it's high risk, because startups do fail. So that's one where in pure sort of failure rate, you have a higher failure rate, but your actual impact is enormous, and you can quantify that you're having an impact simply by the fact that someone that's currently unemployed or someone that can't access, or the growth you generate. So that in commercial terms is less commercial, but hugely additional and hugely impactful.
It is. I mean, it's sort of second to none in that respect. So bring to life a little bit, maybe one or two of the products, because I mean, it seems to me, and from my understanding of banking, it's largely debt driven. It's largely loans as such. I mean, is that the extent to which you guys work, or is there other mechanisms you work within?
So we actually, perversely, we very rarely do we actually provide the funds straight to the business. What we do is we operate through delivery partners. So we have 200 organisations, more than 200, but let's call it 200 organisations that we work through. And the way I describe it, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's a bit like a franchise.
Right.
So what we will do with those organisations, we've got loads of different products and financial sort of instruments and ways of operating with them. And we will sort of design the product or design the service and then work with them, and they're like the franchise. And so they're then out there as our sort of they're the sort of boots on the ground or the place in the marketplace, and they will quite often distribute the funds on our behalf. Or on occasions, what we would do is actually we don't even provide them funds; we provide them with a guarantee. So an organisation will use their own money to put that money into an SME, but they might take a little bit more risk, or they might do it in a slightly different pricing structure, or they might do a different segment of the market because we're giving them a guarantee. And so what you're trying to do is find. Sometimes
you're the guarantee for the SME.
We provide a guarantee to the lender
that if the SME doesn't come good,
they've got backing, so they can take more risk or do something differently than they would normally do.
Wow.
So so you've got startup loans where we're funding direct, small loans going out still through partners, but the funds are going out at that. You've got something called the Growth Guarantee Scheme, which is a guarantee where the funders, CDFIs, they use their own money, but they have that guarantee sitting behind them to encourage them and to help them do things they couldn't otherwise do. And then all the way through to venture capital, where you're sort of we're working with, again, through our partners, but providing funds to the partners for them to then invest in fast growth businesses.
You're literally kind of at every part of the ecosystem at every stage.
All focused on SMEs, yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting, because just hearing you say that, you're certainly enlightening me, and I'm sure for the audience too, because we haven't heard much about the British Business Bank and what you're operating as. You think you've got a branding problem?
Well, I think in some cases we do operate in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are, we try and always think about the customer being that end user, that end business. They're the people we're there to support. But in a way, also our customers are those other financial intermediaries, and I think so. Sometimes we're in the background, but over the last couple of years, we are spending a lot more time on starting to get our brand more recognised for a whole host of reasons. We did become much more sort of publicly recognised because we also did all the COVID schemes, so all the COVID debt schemes. So bounce back loans, COVID loans, future fund. So pretty much all of the financial support from a debt perspective and an investment perspective came through the bank as well. And so that raised our profile quite considerably. And since then we've been on a journey to get our name more well known, partly because we think what we do is good and we want people to know about it, and we want people to, even if it's not with us, to know they can go and find a growth guarantee scheme with whoever they go and find that with, and we try and signpost people to the funding. But also, it helps us also get more information almost back from the market to help us develop the next phase of products.
Exactly.
And so you want to have that sort of almost two-way dialogue with businesses, with SMEs, and also with the financial services industry to make sure we are filling the right gaps in the future.
Richard, it's remarkable, quite honestly. And you know what resonates with me, floating through my head, is that when you said, you're sitting at that evening on occasion where someone talked to you about the evil banker mode. I think this is really quite remarkable in how it's totally different from the perception. And as you say, it's so purpose-driven in some respects, yet of course underpinned by, different commercial motives. And I can see why you've opted to have and to kind of spend your time in this sort of a part of the financial services sector versus others. Let's go back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, you were sitting in the shoes of your young boys. I mean, why did you decide to become a banker in the first place?
It was very, very accidental. Very accidental.
And you were actually a retail banker to begin with, were you?
Retail, yeah, I worked in retail, and I actually worked in retail. I worked for a wine merchant. I mean, you go right back to the beginning. I fell out of university in the sense of with no idea what to do, and my grandma sort of she called it the drifting years, and I drifted quite a lot.
What did you study at uni?
History.
Okay.
Which I still love, still passionate about, and listen to podcasts all the time, but it doesn't naturally lead to a clear direction in your career unless you want to be a teacher, which I did try for a year. So I fell out of university and I sort of drifted around, and at the time it was quite a difficult period actually, because I went through some quite difficult times of sort of almost like what's it all about kind of moments, because didn't have a direction and didn't have anything secure, and was unemployed for prolonged periods, and did lots of sort of very basic contracting work and tried different things. I tried teaching. I bizarrely worked in Arkansas and in a coal mine for the best part of a year, which was very random, and luckily had a wife that was far more successful and motivated and driven than I ever was, and sort of supported me. But I did then sort of end up working in for a wine merchants for 3 years, and realised that wasn't for me either. But I just applied for an advert, and all it was it didn't even name the bank. It just said banker want retail managers, and it was probably you're too young, but I should think. But you've been in the banking industry, but it was right back at the time when banks decided they needed to think a bit more like a retailer.
Yeah.
And so I applied, and we were living in the southwest of England at the time, and I missed the sort of the assessment day for that one, and they invited me to the London one, and got a phone call saying that one of the chaps there that I'd met, he wanted me to go and work in London, and so we upped sticks and took the jump and went and spent the first few years of my time Midland Bank, becoming HSBC. It really was a program of them sort of trying to get people into banking, the retail experience, to help them understand how to be a retailer.
That's it. And should banks be a retailer?
Well, I still think they need to have they do need to have the mindset. I mean, it's not that sort of that how a high street works has obviously changed massively in 25 years. But if you think about a retailer needing to have sort of, to my mind, sort of always got a humanity in the system. Yeah. Whether that's I think you need to have people available. I think, but also you need to have an online presence. You need to have the sort of that speed of service, the agility that a modern retailer has. And I think a bank has to think like a retailer, even though that model of a bank on every high street is clearly moving on from that. I wouldn't say it's obsolete, but I think it's evolved.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. Fascinating, right? Coal miner, wine merchant, retailer. But then you ended up really very much focused in the commercial banking scene.
Yeah.
And I think there's the shift from retail banking, where we first met, and then you ended up going into the more commercial side of things. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about what you think were the key skills that you needed to be successful, both in the environment of retail banking as well as commercial banking?
So for me, sort of the key skills for me were actually this is a personal thing. So I'm not saying this is necessary right for everybody, but I think there is something in it, which is having come from a sort of diverse background. When I first sort of joined, I struggled with, I think people call it imposter syndrome, but whatever you want to call it, that I hadn't gone into banking in a traditional route. That I'd done a lot of things, that I hadn't done a finance qualification, I hadn't sort of gone on a graduate scheme or anything like that, and felt, and constantly felt someone's going to catch me out here. I'm in the wrong place. And I think the sort of key skill for me was the realization, well, there's two things, that a lot of things, of course you need a technical knowledge, but technical knowledge can be learned. That, of course, things are complex, but sometimes they're over complex. And what I think I've learned, the key skill is the ability to sort of realize that actually the things that make me different and I worry about somehow not being, actually they're my strengths. So I think in any career, but particularly in finance, it's understanding what are your strengths, what are your points of difference, what are you good at, and not worrying about the things that perhaps you don't have at that point in time, the technical or the experience, whatever it is, whatever your sort of potential weaknesses are, absolutely do something about them. Make sure they're not like a fatal flaw, but concentrate on your strengths. And for me, the strengths at that particular time were, I was different. I'd done different things. I had an experience. I was a retailer. I wouldn't say I'm a creative person for the creative sector, but in that environment, I was creative. I was innovative, and so glory and the ability to sort of glorify and focus on your strengths rather than over worrying about the weaknesses. And I think that I think is a key strength. I think frankly in most industries, but at the time, and I still think true today, definitely in banking, that sometimes we overcomplicate, or we almost make the products, for example, too complicated, too intimidating. And it's like, how do you simplify? How do you explain it? How do you help that person that's not a finance expert understand of these 5-10 different products? What's the right one for them? Help them understand it. And I think that was a key strength. And I think it's something that today is just as important as it was 25 years ago.
You talk about 25 years, and I was just going to say that. I mean, I think when we first came across each other was probably about that range of time ago, at least 20 years ago. Mm. And to this day, I have to say, the one thing that struck me about you, Richard, was your ability to relate to different types of people. And I think that's something that I still remember when you were walking in the shop floor in Uxbridge branch. You had the ability to, talk to everybody, one of those customers and your colleagues, as well as really understand what perhaps they were going through in that time.
Yeah.
I wonder whether you could pinpoint where that came from. How were you able to hone in that sort of acute understanding of people?
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. So I do. So again, I think it's so that period which I go back to where my grandma said I was drifting, where at the time it was really hard. I look back and say that was the pivotal period, because I was each of the things I did there, I think, gave me something that I still carry today. Something about, so for example, I tried teaching for a year. Yeah. I've still never stood up in front of a crowd. I do get to speak in front of big crowds on occasion, multiple thousands on occasions. I still don't think there's anything as scary as just standing up in front of a group of, teenagers. That, and so that to me, there were things that I took away from that helped me there, but also how to talk. You learn how to teach people, and then going and working in a coal mine in Arkansas. There's different characters, so you're speaking to different people, and then working in retail, I have to sort of understand and talk to people in retail. So I think sort of that diversity of experiences, I do think played a part in what hopefully is a skill that you've commented on there, and that ability to relate and talk to different people about different things. And I agree, it's a sort of an important thing. Whereas if and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and probably be far more help with having a more structured path. But if you followed a more structured path, I think people need to then think, okay, how do I bring that breadth in? If my path's been more traditional, then there's a risk that I don't have that breadth of experiences. So how do I bring it in?
Well, what I love is you're describing what I guess the common terminology these days is a bit of a squiggly career, certainly in the early times and the
Yeah.
early points of that.
Yeah.
And then it enabled you to really understand perhaps and hone in your skill set, what maybe you were good at, maybe your strengths and weaknesses,
Yeah.
and perhaps what you enjoyed
Yeah.
in going through that. But let me just say that I don't think that, scaling the heights of one of the largest companies in the world and thereafter doing what you do today is by any coincidence. So, I don't know, maybe you've had some reflective moments on how were you able to navigate your career through turbulent environments, maybe tricky environments, maybe political
Yeah.
environments.
Yeah.
How do you think, and what makes that success, and perhaps what can others learn from you as in terms of a career and how you scaled your career?
Yeah, that's a big question. Well, there's a few things. There are a few things. There's a phrase, and there, stand on the shoulder of giants.
Wonderful phrase.
And I think I've been very lucky to have a lot of giants that they've either helped me up or I've stood on their shoulders. So I think having sort of
Coincidentally that you've managed to get into the mind's eye of those people, or how did you cultivate that?
So initially by accident, and then I did then sort of have that sudden moment of revelation where you realise actually this is important. So then cultivated. So I don't think it was called at the time, but I kind of developed a kind of like a mentor and coach and influencing map, which I kind of just, it's quite a long time ago, but sort of drew it out, and I've sort of kept that going throughout now. And although I'm not the most structured person, I have a structured approach to that. So I kind of, in a perverse way, make sure I have a way of who's important, who are the people, who are the relationships I have that are important. So I actually have consciously think about it. And then frankly, just track last time I spoke to them, last time I've interacted, have I interacted? And you have to do this stuff with integrity.
Yeah.
But if you're then constantly thinking, crikey, so-and-so, they're really important for my career, my development, my job, my success, whatever it might be. And then you start to think, okay, well, I actually haven't touched base with them for 12 months, whatever it is. Okay, I'm not saying I wouldn't reach out without a reason, but it's okay, let's be conscious about this. Let's just think about when I was at HSBC, are there bank events that I'm maybe thinking I'm not going to go to, that I know they'll be there? Do you know what? Get off your backside and go. Make the effort. And so just a degree of structure about it so that you've then got that network that is then useful when you need it.
It's so incredibly insightful that you described this, and the way that you consciously are being able to track some of those key moments, those key individuals. What I typically find, by the way, is I'm totally intimidated by events, right? Like, and I get to the point where it's like, okay, they might be there. Do you have any thoughts or tactics that when you're at events, I mean, how do you approach those type of individuals, or how do you kind of almost unintimidate the situation so you're able to approach them and make good conversation and meaningful conversation with the people that you need to?
I think very few people don't find it intimidating. So I think you're right. And I think the key is to sort of try and find your own little sort of tricks of the mind to try and remove the stress of that sort of situation. So the things that sort of have always worked for me is the same for any sort of networking type thing, and business network is actually bring down the expectation. So, and this is probably less for that scenario, but more for sort of networking. I usually sort of think you're going to something, there's 100 people there. Just have your key objective to find 2 people are good contacts. You're not there to find 5, 10, 100, just 2. And then there's also an element of, which is slightly broader again, but I'll get back to your question, but find out who's there in advance. Simple things, but and actually there's not a list out. Usually there's a desk, and usually people on the desk are usually, frankly, it's not the most interesting job, so chat to them and say, oh, who's here? Is there anyone interesting? I'm from so-and-so, I'm from HSBC. Who's anyone here that I should meet? So work out who you want to see. If you know who you want to see, as the sort of particular example, I think if you know you're seeing, the way to take some of the stress out of it is let them know you want to speak to them in advance. So it's that dropping a line to someone, say, I know I've not spoke to you for 12 months. I gather you're going to so-and-so. I'm going to be great to catch up.
Super.
So firstly, they might give you a really warm response, which takes all the stress out. But even if they don't, you've logged it in your mind, you reminded them who you are, And then when you go up, they're kind of like, oh yeah, nice to see you again. And you've got the opening. I think that's what I would do quite regularly.
So in a world where the answer can't be both, is it a world of who you know or what you know?
Both. I think it comes down. It does still come down to what you know. I think you have to be credible, but then to maximise your what you know, it then becomes not necessarily who you know, but just how you deal with relationships and how you deal with people. But you have to be credible at the base, which is what I go back to earlier about. Absolutely know and amplify your strengths or your points of uniqueness, but also fix your fatal flaws.
So you talk about that, and you came in from a non-traditional background. You didn't necessarily have the banking qualifications when you started at the outset. A little bit of imposter in that scenario. How did you earn the credibility of your banking colleagues to then scale the way you did?
So I think it partly goes back to say you put the hard yards in to get, to make sure that you can, the credibility stuff. So there was some hard yards of doing stuff that, getting some qualifications, making sure that you fix some of those fatal flaws. And I remember it was sort of, particularly when I converted out of retail into commercial, because it was a big jump, and one of those giants that backed me massively put me into that particular job as sort of director of a sort of West London commercial centre. And I really hadn't got a lot of commercial experience, but luckily, or through a bit of, I had someone that backed me. I spent a lot of time just reading financial accounts and researching, and so you have to get the credibility to be able to then talk to the relationship directors and the people that got the clients with some credibility. So I think you have to put that sort of homework in, but don't try and be something that you're not. It's that back to the point I keep saying. It's like, but remember why that person backed me. He didn't back me because he knew I was a technical expert on commercial. He backed me for something else. Do you know what I mean? There was something that he saw.
I see it.
And it wasn't my ability to read accounts, but I had to learn, but I had to do that so I was then credible. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Today you're sitting as the co-chief banking officer.
Yeah.
Do you still have imposter syndrome?
It creeps in now and again. It's still there. I think when I'm at my best, I use it really, really well. So I kind of, and again, it might be just a mental trick and just sort of, but what I've sort of tried to do is when you get that little nagging doubt and something's firing in the back of your head and sort of there's that sort of imposter syndrome starting to kick in, what I've started to use, okay, metaphorically, and it's actually sometimes I kind of have that's interesting. Why is that happening? What's going on? Why am I?
It's speaking to your inner voice.
Yeah, it's almost like, first sign of madness, or maybe it's, but it's that sort of something's happening here. So therefore, something's going on. Either there's something going on. I need to deal with it. That's my trigger warning that there's something going on that I need to deal with to sort of quieten it down, or enjoy it. Go for the ride. You're out of your comfort zone. So it's either because you're out of your comfort zone, you're doing something different, and there's something going on. Revel in it. Or think about why are you worrying about this thing? And so is there some homework you need to do? Do you need to sort of do some of that groundwork to quieten that issue and move on? Now, again, it might sound absolute madness, but yeah, it still fires, but I do try and think about it as something that's constructive. It's me telling me something.
Isn't it great? I think that's a lovely perspective to take. When are you most out of your comfort zone?
When am I most out of my comfort zone? So I think probably, where I'm most at risk of being, so where I have to put the extra effort in is when it comes down to, so I'm not a finisher. I'm not a completer finisher. That's not, so I'm out of my comfort zone when I have to kind of sit down and actually work through the finer points of detail on something. And I know that, and I have to do it, but I have to force myself to do it. I am your classic person that get it 90%, And then what's the next exciting thing? What's
You're
the
like
next
you're
thing?
you're like a startup guy sitting in a big sort of business environment.
But and I think there's plenty of people around. I think so. I think it's partly that self-awareness. So I think and then it's having routines and solutions to that, knowing that. So making sure, frankly, there's people around you that revel in stuff that you're not great at. And I'd like to think the teams I work with, I'm very honest with them about it. And I say, look, but I can do it, but I am able to do it. So it's sort of having people around me that like doing stuff that perhaps I don't get positive energy from. Be honest, so that there's people around that can catch you and can say to you, Richard, I think you need to sort of knuckle down and deal with this. And so that your team have that confidence that they can challenge me, but also be willing to put the hard yards in when you have to.
Richard, you talk with a high degree of introspection, that you've thought about the way that you work, the way that you manage, the skills that you have, it's conscious.
Yeah.
Is that a consequence of embracing feedback from people, or is it a consequence of really kind of taking the time yourself to think about scenarios and situations you've been in and how you've performed in them?
I think a combination. So there's one thing that I would say has been most helpful for me around this was, so you've been on a lot of courses along the way, and training and development courses, all that sort of stuff that organize. If you work for a big organization, you're sort of fortunate enough to get sent on. And I always try and think, again, it's a bit like going to a networking event. I always think I'm going to take one thing away from this course. So rather than sort of lots of things, you go for 3 or 4 days, but it's like, what is that one sort of brilliant thing that I'm going to do differently? And there's one course I went on a long time ago, and I've evolved a little bit, but from then on, I keep a win, learn, change diary. So every week, nearly every week, I sometimes miss it, but basically, at the end of a week, I write down on I used to on a piece of paper, and now on my laptop. But what's the one win I've had this week? What's the one thing that's gone well? The thing that I'm really pleased with. What have I learnt this week? What's the one thing I've learnt this week, and what am I going to change? And I do that pretty religiously once a week, and it's quick. It's not a lot. It's a sentence, 3 sentences, but I've found it hugely valuable, because it forces that reflection, it forces that introspection to kind of just take a minute, pause. Life is hectic, and just go, okay, it's like a breath. It's like, okay, some weeks it's really important because you have horrible weeks and it feels like everything's gone wrong, but it forces you to go, yeah, but one thing's gone well this week. And sometimes they're ridiculous, but I'm like, okay, at least something's gone well. But more importantly, that kind of, what have I learnt this week? And I think it's been important. And what's, I think, doubly valuable now is I've got this sort of like a kind of diary of what's been going on. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating how many times I promised myself I'm going to change something and I've never changed it. That's quite scary.
Isn't it?
But equally, you can see the evolution of different things that work, things that haven't worked. So I think for me, that was one thing I took away from a course that I thought was really good, and I've kept that going.
Win, learn,
change. It was one thing that's gone well. What's the one thing I've learnt this week? What's the one thing I'm going to try and change? And sometimes it's a big thing, sometimes it's a tiny thing, but works for me.
There have been times in your career where you'd been faced with forks in the road.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe job changes, role changes, things haven't gone your way. Have you got an example or something in mind where you kind of have learned the most from, in perhaps when things haven't worked out the way you wanted them to?
Yeah. So my kind of route to those forks in the road moments generally, and quite often the big ones are sort of, career, job changes, new job, that kind of thing. I have intentionally tried to particularly, especially even now, but particularly sort of early in my career, if there's it's very rarely a binary choice, but if there's a choice, to try and follow that, to almost think about which is the harder path and take the harder path. I.e., I can remember on a number of occasions, colleagues and people saying, "Why do you take that job? Oh my God, that's an awful. Why would you do that one? There's a problem there. There's an issue, or that's never performed, or that's a dreadful thing, whatever it is." That kind of, and I would actively look for those, because I kind of always felt a few things. One is, frankly, turning around something is hugely rewarding. Slightly sort of tactically, if you take something that's brilliant, it's quite hard to get it even more brilliant. Take something that's actually got something that's sort of got a slightly difficult situation, then it feels like there's only up. And also, in my experience, generally, the pleasure of building a team is enormous, because you're trying to create something. You're creating something new. Sorry, banged your mouth. So I think actively looking for sort of the hard path, I think, helped massively. But learning from pivotal. So a pivotal one for me was I had a difficult moment where some sort of legal investigations. Hadn't done anything wrong, but got drawn into something really quite grim, quite horrible, quite difficult. And I remember going home to my wife and just saying, "I've not done anything wrong. I'm okay, and I know I'm okay, but I can see how this is going, and this might be it. I might be sort of, my path is going to take a different path and lose my job and everything else." It wasn't sort of, don't get me wrong, it wasn't sort of, I wasn't going to go to prison, but it was sort of, something that would impact me, and if it went, I'd sort of, potentially lose your job. And that was a really, really hard thing to sort of accept and to say and to talk about. And it was sort of, but it was, I wouldn't say quite life-changing, but it was hugely powerful, because luckily I have a wife that is very good at dealing with situations, and she sort of constructed a kind of, we had a conversation. She just deconstructed not the issue that I was dealing with at work, but the consequences of the issue. And it was almost, okay, so what does that mean? And kind of broke it all the way down. And it was sort of, I was like, yeah, but if they don't believe me, if I can't demonstrate that I'm sort of not involved in all of this, I'll lose my job. And she's like, okay, so what does that mean? Well, probably can't afford the house. And she was like, okay, so what does that mean? Well, we'll have to sell up. What does that mean? Well, we'll have to sort of move, somewhere else. And so what does that mean? And I was like, well, and it ended up being kind of doing the thing, I was like, well, we might have to go and move up to Scotland, live in a smaller place, and you might have to do a bit more work, and I might have to spend more time with the kids and be actually, I quite like this outcome. And it was genuinely kind of, it was deconstructed down to the worst that could happen, that we were in a fortunate enough position that, Kerry was working, we were healthy, yet we could live in a smaller house. That's not the end of the world. We'd probably have to it was like, it's not that bad.
And Scotland isn't so bad either.
Well, that's our dream. We want to go and live in Scotland. And she was like, we just do our dream early. And maybe we don't, we just live in a smaller place than we have, but that's not so bad. And that frankly just gave me the freedom to take risks at work. Because the constraint about taking risks is worrying about the consequences of, might get it wrong, might fail, whatever it might be, might lose my job or whatever it is. But if actually that's not that scary, you can take the risk.
What you've described there, and you use the term as well, is it's such a great coping mechanism for the fear of failure, which holds so many of us back.
Yeah.
The thought about not taking your chance, not taking a risk for fear of the consequences of what that happens, whether that be personal, whether that be reputational, and all the like. And actually working it through on a rational basis of, Dr. Pepper, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us would do really well in being able to just heed some of that advice, heed some of that thought process of working it through, working it to the nth degree. And then all of a sudden you kind of go, I'll be able to live the life that I kind of always wanted to, just a bit earlier.
And I agree, but to sort of slightly pull it all the way back round again, that's why I like entrepreneurs so much, is because they take the risk, they take that leap. And actually, I've sat here sort of saying, it's almost like talking myself up, but I know I've never been brave enough to do that. I know that I would love to be an entrepreneur, really, but I've never been brave enough to take that risk. But that's why I like working with them, is that it's a big step to kind of leave a job or invest your money or borrow money or whatever it is to try something that's, it's a startup, isn't it? It doesn't exist. You're creating something. It's amazing.
I completely agree and can see that perspective wholeheartedly, Richard. We talk about entrepreneurship and we're talking about changes in the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, gosh, it's an incredible time to be alive, but we also are on the cusp of dramatic change. AI being at the cornerstone of pretty much everything we do, and even changes this week to the way LLMs are going to work and different macro geopolitical factors kicking in play around the tech space. How do you see things playing out in terms of the changes, and how do you see business adapting to perhaps the new economic models that are going to come for us in years to come?
Yeah. Well, this is sort of slightly crass answer, but businesses do adapt because that's what they do. Businesses adapt. They by and large, they're probably more agile than the majority of people because they have to be. I think you've mentioned it, but AI is, I don't profess to be an expert, but AI is quite clearly the sort of the key thing that's going to change the way businesses operate in ways that we've not even imagined, and I think that's, and just why I go back to sort of, that's why entrepreneurs generally adapt, because for many that's scary. For them it's opportunity, or the good entrepreneurs are the ones that are going to make from it. So I think AI and the implications of AI is clearly going to be transformational. I think the other sort of areas and things that are interesting at the moment is actually where who knows, but are we heading into a sort of a era of more sort of isolationism, and there's a lot of talk about tariffs and trade barriers and all that sort of stuff, which it doesn't sound great, and probably isn't, but again, the sort of the successful entrepreneurs of the future, they will spot the opportunity within that, so at a very, very crass, crude level, if something isn't getting shipped in from somewhere else and people want it, there's an opportunity, very, very simplistically. So I think those are the sort of two areas which I think are interesting to see how that develops. But I think you when you bring back to the entrepreneurial sort of mindset, it's always, okay, something's changing. Is there opportunity for me?
And I suspect that you would say the same whether you're an institution like yours today or where you had been in your previous organization at HSBC, that as a somebody working in that environment, isn't it kind of similar that you see opportunity and you fill gaps in that way too? And if you were navigating a career in those institutions, is that what kind of advice would you give people? Similar to that as being an entrepreneur in the big landscape?
Yeah, there's a lot. In recent years, there's been a lot of talk about sort of entrepreneurialism, I think is the other one. But I think having an entrepreneurial mindset does help, even in the biggest organizations, because it's, what does that mean? I think is fast moving, risk taking, innovation, and spotting the opportunity. So I think trying to develop that mindset in whether you're running a business or you're working for someone, I think is hugely important. And when people are recruiting, not every role, there's lots of different roles, but 9 times out of 10, that's something that people are looking for. It's that kind of, whatever that technical job might be, or that particular product, or that service job, or whatever it might be. But if someone's got that little spark of entrepreneurialism, I think that's a big tick in a box.
So what advice, therefore, based on that, would you give to your lads today on how to forge a successful career? Not that they'd take it, by the way.
No, they wouldn't take it. So I think the advice that when they're at that age where they start thinking and talking about it is, work isn't a field of dreams. Work has its dull days, its difficult days, its challenges, its bad days, bad periods, etc., etc. But life is far better if you can find something that by and large you enjoy and you can be passionate about. Be passionate about something, and I just think the people that you meet that are most engaging, best company, most interesting are those that are passionate about something. And I just think if, particularly at an early stage of life, and it doesn't always go that way, and sometimes you have to do some monotonous stuff along the journey, but try and find something you can be passionate about. And so I think that's important. And I think but then the other side of it is, and I think most parents would say something like this, but it's also about putting some hard work in. I'm probably going to sound like a early 50s-year-old grumpy person, but there is that temptation to sort of, with the way that media works, is to sort of think that things are easy, that somehow it just lands on people's laps and everything like that. It's like, well, no, even the most successful people that look like it's easy, they've worked really, really hard if they run, if they've created a business. So I think be passionate and accept and respect the hard work it takes.
Richard, it's been a fabulous conversation here today. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.